Good afternoon. This is Media Center, Ukraine, Odesa. We are starting today with the briefing dedicated to UAVs. Our speaker is Yaroslav Honchar, co-founder of Aerorozvidka, Aerial Reconnaissance Group. Good afternoon. You've been dealing with UAVs since 2014, but I'm sure that over the last year and a half, you have seen a lot of changes in our activities, in the enemy's activities. Could you please share more details about this? Yes. Over the last year and a half, I've seen a lot of changes. And first of all, I would like to emphasize the massive usage and production. The number of UAVs used now by both sides of the Ukraine-Russia war is unique. We have not seen anything like this before. And perhaps this is the most important fact. The number of UAVs has increased in several times in terms of the both production and usage by different units. All units now use these devices. We can see that now there is no unit without UAV. Starting with the infantry and our colleagues from the air defense forces, special operations services, naval forces, robotized unmanned vehicles are now used in all domains. And this is a historic turn point, because the planet has never seen anything like this before. Thank you. And all the time we can hear that we need an increased number of FPV drones, so the kamikaze drones, combat drones that are operated to attack enemies' manpower or some other targets. What do we lack to increase the production capacity for such drones? There is a lack of spare parts or some production lines. We should use a wider approach to answer the question. It is not only about increasing production capacity. This is a new phenomenon, the robotized systems and their integration in combat activities, in combat management. We should have a complex approach. This is general capacity to use robotized systems. We should not say that we just need FPV drones. Of course we need them. But we also need operators for them. We also need doctrine to use such drones. Of course, this should be a question of training, leadership, compatibility, maintenance. And only with such an approach we can answer the questions like yours. As far as I remember, and as far as I understand, the aerial reconnaissance and these drones are the part of the military doctrine of Ukraine. And you say that we need to modify doctrine to increase the wider types and wider number of robotized equipment. Yes, you're perfectly right. And actually, this is just our life. Relations in the society are way ahead of regulations. There are new drones, like person view. But there is no regulation how to use them. There are no best practices. There is no regulation about what units should use such drones and which types of drones can be used, how to train personnel, etc. So now there is kind of a hype around FPV drones, so we can see their efficiency, capacity of such drones, and the civic society is now united around such drones, saying that we need more of such drones. Yes, we really need more of such vehicles, but I would like to emphasize once again that we cannot do with such drones alone. We need trained operators. We need proper planning of the missions involving such drones. We need to have technical support and all other elements ensuring efficient usage of such FPV drones. Otherwise, they will not be as effective as possible, and we should have approach to the general capacity and general development. Can you see now an attempt to include these and other drones in the military doctrine? Because I remember that a year ago we saw the videos with the results of operations involving drones for long-range artillery attacking Russia's equipment. We now can see videos from FPV drones, or how bombs are launched from Mavic drones to attack enemy's manpower. Can you see now the attempts of the military leadership to include these drones in the military doctrine and to develop some rules for the development of this domain inside the armed forces of Ukraine? Yes, I can see such attempts to regulate these activities. According to the Ukrainian legislation, this is the General Staff of Ukraine, which is responsible for such activities in line with the law on national security. The General Staff is responsible for developing requirements and regulations for such activities, and there are certain proceedings and progress. So I will not assess the efficiency of such attempts because this is too early to say about the result. There is no still regulation for FPV drones operators, but we need to understand that when it comes to turning experience into new doctrines, this is a circular process. Today we're discussing FPV drones, so tomorrow we can see some new vehicles. And the cycle just repeats as soon as we get some new UAVs. And we will need to think about how to use it to describe its capacity. And this is a huge amount of work. So we cannot just copy-paste regulations for different means. Our society can learn from news now that we now have the units with combat drones. We're testing this approach. And if it's efficient, is it efficient? We'll see about it later with time. But such activities, such attempts, shows that our command response they create the units with the combat UAVs. Yes, we can always see some new conditions. And for me, it's like sea drones that have been actively used for the last year and a half or a bit more. But coming back to the air, we've heard some news about the fact that China will limit the export of spare parts for drones. Will it become a challenge for Ukrainian manufacturers of drones and the armed forces of Ukraine using them? This will be a huge challenge. And we know that China is the world factory, producing a big lump of spare parts needed for the production of such types of equipment. If it's really so, we will face yet another challenge, and our manufacturers will feel the lack of such spare parts. But some spare parts for drones are already produced in Ukraine. We have our capacity, but we cannot cover all spare parts because there are some spare parts that are not produced in Ukraine, and I'm sure that we should not expect its production in the nearest future. For example, like controllers, microelectronics, processors, we should not expect that in the nearest future we'll have a factory in Ukraine producing these spare parts because the last factory in Kiev, Electron-Mash, was constructed during Soviet times, and it doesn't produce anything anymore. And this could be a huge challenge for us. We've got a question from a journalist watching us online, and he asks the following. How do you think, is it possible for the NATO army to use Ukraine's doctrine in its manuals with regard to using of FPVs and other UAVs? It's possible, but I would like to explain it a bit, because when it comes to such a question, sometimes we do not understand its depth, causing different manipulations. And I don't like this. And when we're discussing about sharing best practices by NATO and Ukrainian armies, the society should understand some facts that will be constant. First of all, our way to the NATO. This is a part of our constitution now, and we should not explain it. But what does it mean? This means that the Ukrainian army must implement NATO standards. So there could not be any discussions here. We will not have Ukrainian standards. If we want to become the part of this club, to be under this umbrella, we have no other choice, but to implement NATO standards. We need to understand this. There are different NATO standards, like operational and technological. When it comes to technologies, for example, they can regulate the frequencies and the ways of modulations that should be used by robotized platforms and drones. And they are operational standards regulating the ways to organize military units or military groups for combat activity. And the standards at the operational level should be implemented by Ukraine in line with the work and activities of the managerial bodies of the NATO. But there is also a tactical level for the combat field. These are instructions for specific units. And this is should be a national solution, because NATO standards do not cover tactical levels. And here, at the tactical levels, we can have a synergy which is of interest to both parties, Ukraine and NATO. On the one hand, we should implement NATO standards and to train our officers to perform their duties in headquarters and staffs in line with the experience of our allies in the NATO states. But on the other hand, we have the experience in the combat field, and we pay a huge price for this experience, and this experience can be useful for the NATO countries. Thank you. As for the ready solutions and as for the hype of the first-person view drones, I've seen the interview of the Minister of Education in the end of spring, where he offered to just produce such drones at schools, the labor classes. Do you think it is possible to organize such assembly of drones for the armed forces of Ukraine? Yes, I fully agree with this. I can say that my son now, he's on summer vacation, and he just works at a factory producing spare parts for UAVs. And we need to understand that this is people's war. So everyone will be involved in this war, because this war started 10 years ago. And the whole of society wants the war to be over as soon as possible. But no one can say the precise day when the war is over. In 2014, for me, the biggest motivation was my children not to be involved in this war. And what I have now, my son now works at a factory helping to assemble UAVs. So this is our life, and we should face it. And we need some engineer skills, and perhaps children will find some unique decision, because this is a huge, it's the whole sector, and this is good. And else, actually, this is the future training for our children, because it may happen so, and I hope that it won't be like that. But the children who are now can assemble drones at school will be mobilized in several years if the war is not over, and these children will be prepared. The second question that I've sent to you, that I've asked you about the production of drones in Ukraine, and you said that we should have a more complex approach to capabilities. Could you share more details about how we can expand these capabilities, and what result can we get? Because now we depend on the production of spare parts by China, but perhaps later it could be India or Vietnam if the factories will be there. But what can happen in Ukraine in this sector, and what should be in Ukraine in this sector? This is a well-described process. There is the order of the Minister of Defense describing how to assess capabilities or capacities. There are 7 elements that should be analyzed to understand what we have with regard to each of the items, and where is still the room for improvement. We have the methodology that was provided by the NATO, if I'm not mistaken, in 2017. And this is the capacity-based planning. This is a trend which we now should use. Everything should be described. The Minister of Defense has a catalog of these capabilities. As far as I know, we have more than 500 of them. For the armed forces of Ukraine, and the General Staff should develop its requirements for these capabilities, how they should look like. Everything has been already described. For example, what should have a paratrooper, and the same goes for the robotized platforms. And we all understand that this is the development of humanity, so we move in that direction, how to use robotized technologies, and they are also included in the military management. We need to have doctrine, we need to have instructions, we need to have regulations to understand how such robotized platforms could be used, where should they be placed in the procedure. And now in Ukraine we have new companies for combat UAVs. So this is one of the ways of our development, but we can opt for other possibilities, because we now have information about dozens of companies for combat UAVs. This is good on the one hand, but on the other hand, these are 60 or 80 supply hubs, 60 or 80 persons that we should coordinate preparation, documentation, procurement, logistics. There is still an unsolved issue. Should we have this number of people or companies, or should we just unite them to have 10 for better management? We need to examine everything. Another issue of training, the development of training curriculum for the military educational institutions. Now there is the president's program, which is called Army of Drones, which is managed by Vice Prime Minister Fedorov. They do a lot of good things, but they report that they have trained 10,000 operators. There are thousands of schools, but do the schools have a unified curriculum? Is there a quality assessment for these schools? So we see that people are trained, but we do not know what curriculum was used for that. And for example, we have a serviceman with a drone in a unit, and the commander does not understand if that person is properly trained, because the schools have different curricula, and we do not have a unified one. This is obvious. And we can just look for other capacity elements. For example, when it comes to leadership, on the one hand, we have people with burning hearts who really want to train sincerely, but on the other hand, some people have not been trained properly. And it is noted that the person has been trained, but his attitude or her attitude is not that serious. We can have some servicemen that did not want to be trained, but they were sent somewhere, getting the equipment for several million hryvnias. But we cannot expect from that person to perform their task properly. And we could have another serviceman who wanted sincerely to be involved in the programs, but somehow he was excluded. So there are a lot of things that we should improve. The issue of interoperability or compatibility, if I'm not mistaken, for the procurement by the Ministry of Defense over the last year, when the procedure has been simplified, more than 700 different robotized systems have been procured. Can you imagine 70 different types of UAVs who have different operational systems? They have their own engineer decisions, and everything should be used in the field and should be coordinated by one staff. When we have different spectrums of radio frequencies. And can you see the frustration of our colleagues from the electronic warfare who need to protect our units from attacks by Russia's drones? And we also have our own range of frequencies. So there are many challenges, and there is only a way out of this is to stick to the NATO standards. We have methodology for the development of such capabilities. We should not invent bicycles. We should just follow NATO's standards and procedures as the developed armies of the world do. I have one more question from a journalist watching us online. Can at least partially solve the issue of drones, the force mobilized of equipment as it was with cars in 2014. I am not aware about cars mobilized in 2014. Would like to clarify the question. Is this a question about taking UAVs from other people, from civilians? There is this scheme of forced mobilization, so to say, of equipment for a combat field. Could the same be done about drones? I cannot imagine how is it possible, and I'm not sure that civilians have the drones that we needed. If it's about Mavics, then it's ridiculous. Maybe I will clarify the question because we have several more minutes. But we know that there is still lack of drones, and you've mentioned 70 or 80 different types of drones, and it is difficult for me to imagine how to cope with this big number of different types of drones. I would like to explain here. The question of constant lack of drones is also the question of us not developing our capabilities, and we should develop our capabilities. The availability of drones, operators, training, leadership, procurement, logistics is a complex issue. And it is described with one word, capability, and we need to develop our capabilities. The lack of drones, if it is identified as a problem, is just a consequence. And they can send 50 drones for one unit. Is it enough? If there are no trained operators, if there is no proper planning, if there is no coordination, there will be always the lack of this drone. If we do not develop the whole capability or capacity, that's what I'm trying to explain. Do we have a question from a journalist who has just joined us today? No questions. Thank you. Yaroslav, thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you very much for the analysis provided and for your expert opinion. And we will gladly invite you to us again. If you're in Odesa, please come to us offline. Otherwise, we will invite you online. Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye. Thank you very much. That was the briefing of the head of Aerorozvidka NGO, Yaroslav Honchar. The next briefing will be in 30 minutes, and it will be dedicated to possible actions of the Romanian government because of the Russian threat. Recently, the mine exploded on the coastline of Romania that was brought through the Black Sea. And today we will learn about possible actions of Romania's government because of the Russia threat.